This week on Dig Me Out. With your hosts, Jason Zia and Tim Minichi.
Jay, we're back again with another episode thanks to our Dig Me Out Union on Patreon. You can help us make the next episode happen by joining us at dmounion.com or digmeoutunion.com. And Jay, I'm a raccoon. I'm a trash panda. I'm using this avatar in Zoom, and it's turned me into a creature. And I'm quite liking it. It's got this nice purple sweatshirt on. And yeah, so I think I'm gonna
good luck.
I'm just gonna keep going with this. And this is a episode, Jay, that was selected by the Union via our June album review tournament.
That's right.
And we even bothered to put up a poll at the end so that people could give us their worthy album, better EP, decent single opinions on this specific album, which we haven't done before. But because we're responsive to the requests of the Union, and they said, hey, it would be cool to do that, because when we do these episodes, you don't get the Union's take on an album. We did it. And so
we did it.
We did it. Is that from Paw Patrol or what's that from? We did it. We did it.
You got some Paw Patrol vibes going on right now.
Yeah. Well, you know, there's a filter on TikTok that will turn your dog into a Paw Patrol dog with the theme music. It's pretty awesome. I'm not gonna lie, I did 2 of our dogs, and now they're going to be turned into AI killing machines, probably by some Skynet type device. But that's okay because they looked cute. Also, what's cute, Jay, is that we get a lot of albums in these polls, and they're all over the place. All over.
They are.
Now, for this particular one, I believe that you didn't you group the first round of like more well-known albums? Was that this June poll or was that the previous poll?
That was this poll.
Okay. So it was a little psychological experiment we pulled on the Union. Do you want to tell them why we did that?
We like to run experiments here. There was some sense that more popular in our world records were winning, and by having them distributed throughout the month, it seemed like maybe we were starting to see after 3 weeks just the popular albums get through. So thought we'd give this a shot and see if it wouldn't give a little bit more obscure, lesser known bands a chance to make it to the final. And
by popular, we just mean sort of like well-known names.
Yeah, like instantly recognizable album or band names, and maybe albums for people who are super into music.
Sure.
This is all relative to being, a music nerd.
And all these albums can be suggested by anyone. They just have to go to digmeoutpodcast.com, go to our suggest an album page, and they can suggest anybody. You don't have to be a member of the Union, although we do appreciate the folks that are who get to vote in these polls, but anybody can suggest a record. So let's see. The first poll had Green Day's Dookie, Creed's Human Clay, Daniel Lanois for The Beauty of Winona. Now, Daniel Lanois as a musician might not be well known, but as a producer is extremely well known. He's worked with a ton of important artists, including U2 and Bob Dylan and Peter Gabriel. And I mean, he's one of the biggest producers of the last, I would say, 40 years. The Pet Shop Boys Vary, the Cranberries to the Faithfully Departed. And then there were some lesser known ones, but they still, I remember their names coming up in the 90s. Splendor, Halfway Down the Sky. That was a late 90s album. Denim, which Back in Denim was the name of the album. And that was there was a band called Felt in the, I want to say like 70s or 80s or something like that. And this was the band that was formed by the lead singer Lawrence. It was a new band that he formed. So there was a little bit of lineage with that one. And then Carter the Unstoppable Sex Machine, which was not a huge band in the US, but was a bigger band in the UK. And we've actually talked about one of the records before.
Yep.
And then the other one was Tiger Army, which, can be completely honest, I had no idea who Tiger Army was. Was you just ran out of big names to put in there?
Yeah, I did my best to like find them relatively the bigger bands, and that this cluster ended up having the bigger bands. Tiger Army, obviously not being huge, but you know, it's an epitaph band.
Yeah, it was produced by Tim Armstrong of Rancid. So there's some connections there. So out of that poll, or out of that group, 3 albums finished tied for first: Green Day, Splendor, and the Cranberries, which honestly, not surprised.
Yeah.
Because we haven't talked about Green Day or the Cranberries.
Yeah.
And Splendor, you know, snuck in there as well.
So that kind of played out like I was thinking, you know.
Exactly. So
instead
for
of
this,
having those bands sprinkled, like if Creed would have been some of the other bigger bands, Daniel Lanois, and it's sprinkled throughout the month, the thought was, you know, more of the bands that were in that first poll would have won, and then you'd have saw the band.
Right. So for the second round, we had the Whirlies self-titled album, Spot's self-titled album, Big Hate's self-titled album, Clark Nova's album Host, Caroline Spine's Monsoon, This Picture's A Violent Impression, Sub Circus, their album Carousel, Gaslight Radio's Hitch on the Leaves, and Eugenius, Mary Queen of Scots. And the 2 winners out of that round were Spot and Gaslight Radio. And if you asked me, I probably knew 2 of those names, maybe 3. Although if you told me that Spot was the name of a band in the 90s, I would have been like, yeah.
Oh, yes,
definitely.
For sure. And that's the second time that record had come up. I think maybe a month or 2 ago. It had been nominated once before.
So round 3. And this is where we had some more albums that were lesser known, but some stuff that I knew from, and then some stuff that's relevant to Dig Me Out. This would be it. Chainsaw Kittens Flipped Out in Singapore. We talked with the members of Chainsaw Kittens many, many years ago.
Long time ago. You were still in your apartment.
I was still in my apartment. I was still, I think I was.
Were you single?
I don't know. No, this podcast started right after Katie and I started dating. So likely it was probably 2012 or 20. Yeah, I think it was probably 2012 when we talked to those guys. And I was probably getting ready to have Nina. Well, I wasn't. My wife was getting ready to have Nina. I was getting ready to pass out in the delivery room. And I didn't pass out. Included in this poll, along with Chainsaw Kittens, Reeves Gabriels. Is it Gabriels? You know how to pronounce his name?
Reeves
I know
Gabriels?
Is it Gabriels?
I think so.
The Sacred Squall of Now debut. He's a well-known guitar player for
played with David Bowie, right? And,
David Bowie mainly. He's also played with
King Crimson,
Frank Black. Yeah, a lot of people.
Yeah.
So that record, the self-titled album by Vaganza, I don't know. Songs About Angels, Evil, and Running Around on Fire by Thingy. Now, this album I did know, Oscillate by Salt. They had one single that was kind of like a Buzzbin song. Okay. And I have the 10-inch of that single, actually.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Randomly picked it up at a record store one day.
That's rando.
Yeah. The fact that there was a 10-inch single, not a 7-inch. A Sad Ride on the Line Again by Favez. Lips That Taste of Tears by Trembling Blue Stars. Hullabaloo by The Farm. And 10 Speed by Mystery Machine, which I feel like Mystery Machine has been in here before. Maybe. If not.
Yes.
They should be. Mystery Machine and Chainsaw Kittens moved on. So in the final round, we had Chainsaw Kittens We had Mystery Machine, we had Spot, we had Gaslight Radio, we had Green Day, we had Splendor, we had the Cranberries. Looking at that's a wide range of albums. You think, oh, well, is this going to be a go for the big name, or is there going to be some lobbying for a small name? And Jay, I'm here to tell you, the lobbyists won.
The power of the lobby.
Spot. Out of all those records, Spot. The band that has almost no internet presence aside from a Discogs page and some Amazon reviews.
Yep. Yeah, the most notable thing was that they what's the name of the studio they recorded it?
Well, they recorded that album with
Memphis.
John Hampton at Ardent Studios.
Yeah, Ardent. Yep.
And John Hampton's kind of an interesting name. He also produced the Gin Blossoms debut album. And he's Ardent Studios, if people are familiar, is where Big Star in the 1970s recorded albums like Number One Record and Radio City. And he's got a huge John Hampton, that is, producer credits and technical credits. He worked with Alex Chilton when he went solo. So he's kind of one of those guys that's like on a lot of records, you just don't know it, you know. So they won against all odds. 34% of the vote, 20% went to Green Day, 17% to the Cranberries. So the two big records were right behind that. And then Gaslight Radio and Splendor split at 9%, and Mystery Machine and the Chainsaw Kittens split at 6%. And like I said, we'll be sharing the results of the poll for Were the Album Better EP and Decent Single at the end of the record. But this album is actually streaming. You can get on like Spotify and Apple Music. Good luck trying to find it, because if you just search Spot, you ain't finding it.
Yeah,
because there's a billion other spots. And actually, if you go to Spot on Spotify, which is
Spot on Spotify.
Yeah, there you go. I just realized what I said. So there's an artist named Spot that's also on their page that's not them.
Oh my goodness.
Spotify.
It's helpful
terrible.
if you know the album cover. That's how I've been able to sort through on streaming which album is which.
And there's also multiple Spots. There's like a German synth pop band called Spot. I mean,
of course.
Yeah. Had you heard of them, Jay?
No.
No, me neither. I mean, it's entirely possible that I've seen this album in a used bin somewhere and had no idea what it was.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was maybe Sport, and I just didn't look at it correctly because the font is all swished together on the album cover. And speaking of album cover, I mean, it's a very 90s, completely, utterly unremarkable. It's got some colors. It's got some swirly things happening. I don't know what is supposed to be there. It's just a bunch of neon-ish colors, purples and reds and orange. And yeah, it looks like somebody did it in Microsoft Paint circa 1995. I'm sorry to say.
Yeah, you know, it's the early Photoshop filter look.
Yes. They use the Gossamer, or whatever that was.
Gaussian blur.
Gaussian. So let's get into some comments from our Patreon folk. Ian McIver said, the good, it's not Green Day. The bad, it's not the Spot album by a German synth pop band. The ugly, my vote is better EP. Well, not a bad album. I did lose interest towards the end. And Jeremy Amend, who I believe was the one who suggested this, said, honestly, getting a better EP vote from you on a rock album is like a worthy album from anyone else. I'll take it. And Richard Waterman chimed in. He said, this was a DMO Discord find. The album art and bad name are so quintessentially 90s. The kind of band is why the whole podcast exists, isn't it? Cool rock album with enough weird bits to keep it interesting. Sounds great too. Really nice guitar tones. One of Hazy Days and Into Moon June Spoon is a lovely 1-2 punch. Worthy album. I'm happy for Jeremy to finally make it after years of trying. I'm proud of you, Jeremy. Proud of you. And he said he was going to make it his pick if it hadn't won. So, and Phil said he was going to choose it as well. So that's interesting that we had two people that actually were going to choose this possibly as their yearly pick. Gavin said, I really enjoyed this album. I hear a miniature. No, not a minute. Is it a miniature? No, a minute. I thought it was a miniature. Never mind. In the playing, and even some Shudder to Think in the vocal, both of which are compliments. Maybe some Tripping Daisy as well. I could see this getting stuck in the CD car player or car CD player for weeks at a time in the 90s. The only song I didn't like was One of Hazy Days, but maybe it would grow on me. Where the album. Jeremy said, I guess One of Hazy Days is the ballad. The production choices for the solo on this and some other tracks is very weird. Not bad, just weird. Probably why I like it. So I'm going to try to piece together a little history on this band.
History of the band.
I know based on some reviews on Amazon from like the mid 2000s, a little bit of information. So the band was Chad and Reggie Ruffer. I think that's how you pronounce it. It's Rueffer, and they're brothers. And on the CD, the drummer is Earl Darling, but when they played live, it was Davis Bixson. They were from the Dallas, Texas area. And the person who wrote this review said they saw him at a Summerfest for 103, a record label, a radio station in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, around 95, 96, and immediately bought the CD. Now, I thought this was interesting, and I'm not going to read the guy's whole review. The only information that I found was a little blurb about Chad and Reggie performing with a country band. A country band. What happened to Spot? So yeah, I guess they're playing like country music now. He said, and this was interesting because I feel like this guy needs to discover our podcast if he hasn't. He said, The Odd's Nest, That Dog's Retreat from the Sun, Failure's Fantastic Planet, and Horses Happens Twice all share the same mantle as you guys of mind-blowing albums by fantastic bands that no longer exist, in my opinion. Okay, well, I think we've actually talked about all those bands.
Yeah.
So Matt Albright
exists.
from 2004, you should probably check us out. Yeah, so that's about it.
There is a 2013 album called EP called Spatter Splash that shares the same logo and is credited to Chad Ruffer. So yeah. I'm assuming it's the same band. That's the only other release I can find on.
So it looks like what happened was they, broke up after this album and went off and did a bunch of other things. The guys in the band, like Reggie Ruffer, he goes on after this and plays with Jane Hooker and the Outsiders, which I don't know. It looks like they're a country band based on the fact that they have a cowboy hat playing steel guitar player.
Yeah.
And then he's in a band called the Insiders, which is a honky tonk band from Dallas that is like from the 2000s up to, I don't know when that came out, but so they've definitely been like continuing with music. I just don't know if and they actually the drummer Earl Darling played with Jacko Pierce. Remember that band? Or does that name ring a bell?
It does, yeah.
They were on an A&M.
Okay.
They put out a bunch of records actually. Up to 2018. I mean, they put out 2 records on A&M Records in the 90s. And so these people did go on and play in other bands after this. But this is the only release. They put out a 12-inch the same year with some songs on it. They had some promotional singles, and I believe that they reunited in the mid 2000s, which is where I think that EP comes from, and played some shows, and they actually recorded the shows like with video, and I think you can go see them on YouTube based on the comments that I was seeing on Amazon. So let's just get into this record, Jay. Tell me one thing you liked about the 1995 self-titled album by Spot.
The guitars on this record really pop. It's the first thing you notice when you listen to the record. It's really interesting combination of kind of metal-ish riffs at times to kind of dirgy downtune bits, so there's this metal core to the riffing, and then that's combined with some really odd like voicings and chord changes, like pretty unexpected at times. Often there's two guitar parts playing, and they'll be playing similar chord progressions, but they're using different voicings or phrasings that are kind of similar but also different. The other thing though that really I think makes it stand out is you've got this really dynamic guitar playing that can be riffy, a little chunky here and there. It also can get kind of bright and sparkly. And a lot of that is, yes, in the playing and the choices, but also like tone wise, it's more of like a Fender tone, which has got like, it's a little brighter. It's got a lot of attacks. So you hear a lot of like, them hitting the strings and really playing the guitar and less of the amp. So you just end up with this very dynamic guitar sound on the record that you can't ignore it. It's in your face. It's a big part of the songs. It's often jumps right out at you at the start of each song. There's a lot of really cool flourishes too, where I think even gets odder in how they may use tremolo, like tremolo bars, and to add dynamics or just make the notes a little bit weird and off kilter. Moo June Spoon is a good example where they're using tremolo a lot, and it creates like this almost surf wave rock kind of vibe. Maybe even at times as far as something like Swerve Driver, where the same way that they use tremolo and kind of hit big chords and like really push, and you hear the notes like kind of warp and move a lot.
Yes, I could stay with you forever, but I've an appointment with a cackling crow inside. It's been here since the start of the ride, and I feel under my white skin the hard caress of dark feather tips within. And isn't that sin? Isn't that sin? Isn't that sin? Well, life is not Rockwell, life is not Moon June Spoon. It's more like crash, bang, boom, more like water from the moon. Yes, I could feel my
Which is, I think, super cool, because that's where they push from like some riffs that might sound like classic rock. Like the record starts with two songs that have like this galloping kind of feel, almost like Heart's Barracuda, but then it works in these strange changes or tremolo parts or secondary parts that make it a little off kilter and weird. So, I think you can't deny the guitar stuff going on here. It's a big part of, I think, the record. And then I think the second part is just vocally, it really moves between, I kept hearing like two singers. I was hearing like kind of a J. Robbins style delivery where it's a little wordy, kind of straightforward and like clear and enunciated, but then pushing to something like a John Bush, where he would really kind of, get a little bit more aggressive, and the voice would break and it would start to get in that range. So that was interesting. Kind of not knowing where the voice was going to go within that spectrum. And then they'll throw in harmonies. Examples would be like Absalon and Fodder are songs where they got, these harmonies that kind of sound like power pop harmonies. So those two singers with harmonies is not something you would necessarily expect. And then you combine that with this really dynamic guitar playing that's unlike any other. I mean, the closest band I could think of guitar wise was maybe Alan Maggie. In the way
I
that
got
they
one
would
for you.
combine riffs with like dynamics and kind of, I don't know. And tonally, it was in the same kind of space. What were you thinking?
Well, when I read that they were from Dallas, Texas, I was like, I know there was some other alternative bands from that era in the 90s.
Yeah.
Area in the 90s. So I was looking, and it kind of reminded me in some parts of the Toadies, who are from Fort Worth.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, I wonder if they were in like the same circuit, like playing the same clubs and that kind of stuff. Because even like his voice kind of gets there every once in a while, and their riffs are big, and the Toadies had some pretty big riffs and stuff. Not the same tones necessarily, but just in terms of style. But that was a band that I was like, I could definitely hear them like in the same scene down there in Dallas, Fort Worth. Because Dallas, Fort Worth is essentially one massive area between those two cities.
Yeah. It's one city in Arlington now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what worked for me. I think it's on its face, it hits you right away with these guitars and the vocal style. And to me, that's what made it unique and would sit out. What worked for you?
Well, like you, right out of the gate, Drop Down is such an interesting song to open with. It's pretty much like a declaration statement. Like, yeah, we're an alternative band, but we're doing things a little bit differently. Like hearing that gallop that you never hear. We've talked about how you never hear that beyond like 70s classic rock or maybe like 80s metal. Like Iron Maiden would use a gallop or some other bands, but to hear this band use that dun, 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 I was like, what is going on?
Flying in the face of fear, every little day of every little year. Everyone now shall hear. Try quick before you branded. Go and see your friend in town. Put on smiles, put on frowns. Nobody now shall sound. Try quick before you branded. Drop down quickly. Something inside is sickly. Drop down quickly. Shut your eyes and weep away. Drop down quickly. Something inside is sickly. Drop down quickly. Shut your eyes and weep away.
It's almost like you can hear that there's a metal influence in some of this playing, but just completely stripped of the like showiness and the over the top, stuff that happens with regards to 80s metal. And it's like they took the musical bones of it and came up with something pretty unique. And it happens quite a bit on the record, where you mentioned it. There are some really weird chord choices, even for like songs that aren't necessarily there. It's interesting because like half the record, the entire song is doing something odd, or they're using weird voicings, or they're using a lot of dynamics. There's a lot of dynamics on this record. And then there's some songs which are a little more straightforward, but they just weave in, it'll be like during a bridge where you'll hear like, I think it's on one of Hazy Days where there's like kind of a normal chord progression, but then they just like on like the third of the 4 chords, they just throw in this weird chord that is, what is that? That's an odd choice. And you can hear this band messing with any sort of traditional structures when it comes to, there's no like, what is it, 1-5-4, that where it's like C D G or G D C, or like there's none of that on this record. There is some interesting things that are like kind of callbacks, like I think it's the beginning of, is it Absalom? It almost like the first note almost sounds like Time After Time by Cyndi Lauper. It's that like really chorused, clean guitar. And then when the strum starts to happen, it's at a different tempo. So it breaks out of that. But when I first heard that, I was like, wow, that's a very 80s sounding guitar tone. And then the beginning of Cut a Wide Swath with that really like vibrato-ish guitar almost has like a twang to it.
Yep.
So they're taking little things like that and then mixing them into this. I don't want to say it's not progressive, but there are a lot of really untraditional choices with regards to chord changes, chord voicings, rhythm stuff that's happening throughout the record that is just like not, it's just not expected. Like Limerica, I think that and Drop Down are probably my 2 favorite songs on the record. I mean, I could imagine like that being a Faith No More song. It has like that could have been on like King for a Day or one of those like 90s records, the late 90s records. It's just got this heaviness and this weirdness to it that makes me go, this is not run of the mill.
Yeah.
I got a piece of that Berlin Wall. Yeah, I brag all about it in my southern drawl. I broke and Jim from hammering time. Cost $1.50 out the bob and dime. I fall for nothing. I stand for nothing. America, the best of everything. Why don't you join me in my free
And I can understand why, this was released on Ardent Records, which was the studio that they recorded at, which is where what released Big Star and stuff. But I can imagine like a major label kind of being confused as to what to do with a band like this, because they're not, I mean, you could maybe take a chance on them, but you'd be hard pressed to find a really blatant single on this record that would fit in with 1995, because things got a little more mainstreamerish with singles and albums and stuff by 95. There's just it's a really interesting record that when you listen to it over and over again, it just gets a little bit weirder every time because you start picking up on more things, and it is a nice re-listen because of that, because there's always, and then you can focus in on like what the drums are doing or what the guitars are doing specifically on multiple listens. So
Yeah. Limerica reminded me too. I can hear the Faith No More thing in there. It also reminded me of How the West Was Won by Helen Maggie.
yes, yep, yeah, he doesn't have the J Robbins comparison is on point, because when he's in that mode of like spitting stuff out, it's not as showy as Happy Chichester can get from Helen Maggie.
It's more like the dynamic of the guitar and like how it's produced, and I don't know, it had that same vibe to me.
Yep. Is there anything on this record that didn't work for you?
Yeah, to me, it really fizzles. It does not end strong. I started to be critical, and I don't know that I've ever said this on the podcast. It may be too dynamic.
Wow.
I'm always looking for dynamics, but I think it gets overly complicated sometimes. Take a song like Ground, which, when that song starts, it's got this very like power pop kind of vocal. And then the first guitar chord comes in and it's this minor chord. And you're like, whoa, wait a minute. Like, this is super interesting. Like, you kind of get this vocal that's a little bright and this guitar that's kind of sad. And you're like, all right, where are we going? And then as the song kind of develops from that point, it gets in its own way. There's so many changes and little shifts and turns, and that I lose like what the melody is and like what the point of the song is, and all the cool little magical moments that it starts out with start to disappear over the course of the song. And it just gets, I don't know, labored sounding. And I think really the last 4 songs on the record feel that way for me. They're all over 4 minutes. They're a bit more meandering. They just don't have, I don't know if I'm tiring of the band by this point of the record, or if the songs are just like overly like working too hard. Like they're trying to take something that's, just not strong from maybe a song standpoint, and trying to like make it work through dynamics and performance. And it's just not coherent for me. It starts off super strong, really until track 6. I'm pretty much on board. One of Hazy Days, I don't know, it's okay. I could give or take that song, but the first 6 tracks I think are really compelling. Unfortunately, the last 4 are just not as compelling to me, and made me start to like be much more critical of the whole record. So it's really a story of 2 sides for me. I think it's a strong start and a very weak finish. Like to the point where like Hole, to me, the last song on the record, I start to hear the local band in them. Like there's like a metal style riff to start it, and then it shifts, and then there's some chord changes in there that sound a lot like a Pixie song, almost too much. I don't know. It just sounds like a bunch of grab bag ideas that you would hear like if you went to see a good local band. You'd be like, oh, they're a good band, but I don't know what their identity is, and I don't know what their sound is. Like that song to me is, and it's the last track on the record, and then you get there, you're like, oh, wait a minute. And to me, it just casts a light on the rest of the record that, as I kept playing it, it sort of soured it a little bit. So yeah, I think it's just pedestrian material, I think, on the second half of the record, that then makes it hard for me to enjoy the first half as much as I maybe did the first couple listens. Anything that worked for you?
Interesting. I actually liked the last couple songs. I hear what you're saying. Like, it does have a very like Metallica-esque start to that song. It sounds like the beginning of Blackened. Dun, 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 dun.
In the ground there are these hills that I keep tripping over. I can walk right by the smelly remnants long left over. In the sky the white gas clouds are dripping by. I wonder what they think about
I tended to not enjoy the stuff that got a little more simple, a little more mid-tempo, a little bit more straightforward. So like Straight Through the Sunhead, One of the Hazy Days, Ground, and Fodder. I found those to be less interesting songs.
Yeah.
I liked it when this band was doing weirder stuff, doing unconventional things, because we hear so much of the sort of sameness with regards to a lot of 90s alt rock records, that this just felt like such a different thing. And it's, you know, none of these are exceptionally long songs. Only Moon June Spoon goes over 5 minutes. Everything else is in a very palatable, like 4 to 4.5 minute range for the most part. I felt like on a song, was it Ground? I think it's Ground. I don't think that that's the main lead singer, or if he is, he's singing much differently than the other songs. It felt like his voice was a lot thinner on that song. And I don't know if like the brothers switched off, like maybe one of them took lead that normally sings backup on that song. With regards to like Hole, I think not Hole, which one was it? I think you mentioned Ground being sort of power pop-ish. Yeah, I agree with you. It kind of sounds like a song that like Imperial Drag would have refined a lot better.
Yeah. Well, there's like a vocal that's trying to do that, and then a band that's doing something else. And I like the idea of that, but it just gets lost in all the changes for me.
Yeah. Like there's also like, there's some really, really good guitar tones. And I think Jeremy brought this up, that are just, and some of that are weird. On that song, it's just so conventional sounding. Like the leads just sound like a lot of other, like, almost metal bands. Like they're very clean tone.
Yeah.
And then even the note choices are like very predictable. Whereas in other songs, things are so unpredictable. And so I don't know if they felt like they had to tone things down here and there because they didn't want to make a completely off the wall record. I don't know.
Yeah, I would say too, with this type of tone, you have to be a really great guitar player, which I think the guitar playing on this record is, you know, way above average. At times it's very, very, very good. But you know, it's probably a Strat or a Telecaster. Not a ton of overdrive. They use some delay here and there, but fairly dry. So when they do more, you really appreciate it. But when they don't, it can sound a little thin and like generic. Some of these riffs, like if they don't add in a bunch of like extra tremolo bends or like little flourishes, it's like, so it's kind of boring. So you can kind of hear them needing to really work hard, you know, in terms of with the dynamics and the extra flourishes and whatnot, to keep some of this stuff like from just being an average riff. That's my thought.
Yeah, it in some ways it reminded me of that Into Another album that we did, Ignore Us.
Yeah.
Where there's a, you know, it's a very, I would say progressive record, but I mean, it has progressive elements besides being like a sort of post-hardcore thing. But then you had that guitar player that was absolutely shredding all over it. And like, it feels like this is kind of one step down from that in some respects. Like some of the guitar playing is really good and some of it is okay. Like I mentioned with on Ground or Fodder, which are one of those two. So this came out in 95. As mentioned, it came out on Ardent Records, which was a fairly not a significant label for the most part in the 90s. I mean, they put out some Alex Chilton solo records. They put out an album by an artist named Idle Wilds, 2 words.
Okay.
They put out a record by Big Tent Revival, by Jolene, by, I mean, none of these are huge names. Clear. That's a terrible name to try to Google right now. The Hot Dogs, so if they were attempting to break this band, I don't think they had a really good shot, because I don't see any other bands that they distributed that would have been, or that they put out that would have had any kind of impact. And I don't remember this being at college radio. It might have been, but I don't remember getting the CD. Like I said, I might have seen it in a used bin somewhere based on that album cover, but this is a hard road to climb in 1995 to try to get onto any sort of, maybe, I don't know what the single would be. I really don't. It's hard to say. I know they put out a Moon June Spoon got a single promo, and Cut a Wide Swath got a 12-inch release with 2 non-album tracks. One's called Non-Holiday, and the other one is called Horse's Head. Yeah, Horse's Head. So it's on a blue splatter. That's interesting. Who got a blue splatter 12-inch put out in 1995? Good for you.
Yeah.
And then that 2013 EP has 4 new songs as well. So, I don't know what those sound like, but I actually would be interested to check it out. But I don't think this had a shot at mainstream radio in 95, and college radio even is like a little bit hard to crack. It's like, does this go into regular? Would this be almost metal? Like in some respect, like if you pick the wrong single, it almost becomes like a metal thing.
Well, I'm with you on the Toadies vibe. I think that's where this would, in best case scenario, land. And I think Moon June Spoon is probably the best chance at that, but it doesn't have the hook that the Toadies had. So takes. I like the dynamic. I like how it builds, but I think it takes too long to build for a pop, a radio single at that point.
Right.
This band, I don't mean this to be disrespectful, but it reminds me of like a band you would see locally that would be like the best band in town.
Right.
And would be awesome live, and you would have a blast going to see them. And you would really, over time of seeing them, a dozen times or something, you would really like get into the songs and know them and
know all the changes. And
and they would be killer live. And I bet dynamically they would be amazing live too. Like, all the different parts and tones and everything would probably work really good in a club. But you could also, understand like why they didn't get bigger. It just doesn't have that crossover big radio appeal, nor is it like deep enough in a niche to have like a, build a hardcore following, because it's just a little too weird. It's too many things.
Yeah.
To find a niche, and then not poppy enough to be, a big radio band.
Yeah. I would have been curious to hear what they did after this, but there's nothing after this. I don't know how much longer they were together after this.
Well, I mean, there's this 2013 album. I don't know what.
Well, they were broken up and then they got back together for that.
Yeah.
So,
but you can hear like as players, members of this band would be great in other bands. Like just listening to guitars alone, I mean, these guitars, you can hear so many different styles that you can imagine them being in all kinds of different bands.
Yes, definitely. So let's get to our overall ratings on this record. We'll share our Patreon patron results in a moment. But Jay, is this a worthy album, a better EP, or a decent single for you?
I'm gonna go with an EP, and I'll just call it first 6 tracks of the record.
Okay.
I'll even leave one of Hazy Days. It's really odd album or song titles on this record too.
Yes, that bothers me a lot.
They do not like jump off the tongue. Often, most of them I'm reading like Straight Through the Sun Head. Like there's a lot of them here that are very clumsy. But yeah, I would just take the first 6 songs, make it an EP, and I think it would be much stronger. Where are you at?
Well, I'm also at 6, but I would swap out Straight Through the Sun Head and one of Hazy Days for Cut a Wide Swath and Whole. And that would be my 6 tracks. I feel like those would go well together as a 6-song EP. Our patrons disagreed with us, Jay. They went 60% worthy album.
Wow.
40% better EP.
Dang. I like it. I mean, if it's going to win the poll, I want to hear worthy album, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I don't want, that would make no sense because we, make these easy to sample when you're voting. So, geez, I would hate for an album to win. Beating 29 other records and then not have it be a worthy album. That would be kind of tragic.
Perhaps the people were just messing with us. You never know, but I believe in their pure intentions, and I'm glad that they brought this to our attention because this will probably be one of the only reviews on the internet for this band ever. So, I mean, they got some like newspaper and magazine reviews, but they're not online anywhere that I can find.
Yeah.
Or they went offline long ago. So that's it. We are the definitive voice on Spot. Good luck Googling them, because I had to think of so many different ways to try to Google their name in order to bring something up. I had to do like Spot 1995 self-titled album just to get to their Discogs page, because of course there's like 40 bands that were named Spot over the last 50 years. So, and if anybody names a band or they name themselves Spot at this point as an artist, they're really asking for a punch in the face from me specifically. If you would like to be like our patrons and vote in one of these polls, both to select the album and to weigh in on its worthiness, you can do so by joining us at dmounion.com or digmeoutunion.com. It's also where you go to you get our aughts episodes, which come out every couple months. We've got a couple more lined up. We're doing one with our friend in Australia, Gavin. He's picked one of the aughts episodes this year. And then we've also got a poll coming up for another aughts episode. You've done 2 so far. Poster Children was the first one. And the Distillers. No, Poster Children was the second one. Distillers was the first one.
Right. Which
you can listen to by joining us at the Union at Patreon. It's also where you can read the box newsletter that comes out every week. 2 reviews of new 80s, 90s, and aughts relevant musical items, whether that's an album or a book or a movie. Usually it's going to be an album because, an album's like 45 minutes, whereas a book takes me a good 6 months. So it's a little more slow going on the books. So you can go to the digmeoutpodcast.com to sign up for the box newsletter, or you can read it by joining us at Patreon. Lastly, you can go to Apple Podcasts and you can leave us some positive feedback if you enjoyed this episode. If you're a member of the band Spot, I hope that you leave us some positive feedback. If only we did you justice. If not, feel free to refrain from leaving any feedback and just write us an angry email. We prefer it that way.
Yeah. Come talk to us.
Yes.
Not on Apple Podcasts.
For Jay, I'm Tim. We're out, and we'll be back next week with another episode of Dig Me Out.